Hey, my name is Sam Rodriguez. I'm 29 and I work the morning shift at Beacon Street Cafe. It's not a nice place. It's not even a clean one most days. The cafe sits on the corner of an old street, the kind where the paint on the buildings is peeling and the sidewalks are cracked from years of delivery trucks. We open early, before most people are awake, because the customers who come here need cheap coffee and something warm in their stomachs before they start their shifts. Truck drivers, construction workers, people who can't afford to be late. I've been here almost 2 years. The pay barely covers my rent and the bills that keep showing up no matter how carefully I try to live. I pick up extra shifts when I can. Not because I love the job, but because missing even a few hours means I might come up short at the end of the month. Before this, I wanted to be a chef. My uncle used to work in a small family restaurant and he taught me things. How to build flavor in a simple broth. How to make bread that actually tastes like something. I like the idea of turning ordinary ingredients into food people would remember. But when my mother got sick and died, the money I'd saved disappeared fast. I dropped the idea of culinary school. I took whatever job paid right away. Most mornings I get to the cafe before 6. I turn on the coffee machine, check the pastries from the day before, and wipe down the tables that still have crumbs and sticky spots from the night before. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease never really leaves the place. Around 6:30, she starts coming in. She's maybe late 20s or early 30s. Thin. Her hair is long and usually tangled around her face. She wears the same dark jacket almost every day. The fabric faded, the cuffs frayed, the zipper only halfway working. She never talks to anyone. She walks straight to the table in the very back, the one by the window that looks out over the alley. She sits with her back to most of the customers, hands either buried in her pockets or wrapped around whatever she's drinking. The others call her the drifter. Becca, who works the same shift as me, thinks she sleeps in the park. Tony says she makes the customers uncomfortable and the owner should kick her out. I don't know if she's actually homeless. I only know that every time she looks at the menu board, her eyes stay on the cheapest items for a long time before she orders. One morning I brought her a hot coffee and a slice of buttered toast. She looked up at me, then pulled a handful of coins from her jacket pocket. She counted them slowly and set them on the table. It wasn't enough for both the coffee and the toast. I didn't say anything. I just gathered the coins, nodded, and went back to the counter. Becca saw the whole thing. "You know she didn't pay enough, right?" she asked. "I know." "Then why'd you still bring it out?" "Because she needed to eat." Becca looked at me like I'd said something childish. "You can't feed every person who walks in here." I gave her one slice of toast, and tomorrow she'll come back. Then tomorrow I'll figure it out again. She did come back the next morning, and the morning after that. It became a quiet habit. Every day I set a coffee and a slice of toast in front of her. She paid what she had. Some days it was close. Most days it wasn't. I never mentioned the difference. She never asked for more. For the first few weeks, we barely spoke. She would nod when I brought the food. Sometimes her eyes would stay on me for a second longer than necessary before she looked back out the window. Then one morning it rained hard. She came in soaked, water running down her face and dripping from her hair. The thin jacket clung to her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the knife to butter the toast. It slipped from her fingers and clattered on the table. She froze, like she'd done something wrong. I picked up the knife. "It's fine." I cut the toast into small pieces, spread butter on each one, and set the plate back in front of her. That was when she looked at me directly. Her eyes were red, maybe from the rain, maybe from something else. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, clear, not rough the way I'd expected. It sounded like someone who had been taught to speak properly once. "I just cut the toast," I said. "No," she answered, still looking at me. "You did more than that." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded and went back to the counter. After that, she started talking to me. Small things at first. "Does it stay this busy every morning?" "How long have you worked here?" "Do you actually drink that burnt coffee every day?" I answered. The conversations grew longer. One morning she asked my name. Sam? She repeated it like she was trying to remember the sound. I'm Amelia. That was all she gave me. I didn't ask for her last name. I didn't ask where she lived. I could feel she didn't want to talk about those things, and I didn't want to make her explain herself just to earn a cup of coffee. One day she asked what I used to want to do before I ended up here. I wanted to be a chef. Wanted? I still know how to cook. I just stopped thinking it was something I could actually do. Why? Money, time, life. She watched me for a moment. If none of those things were in the way, she asked, would you open a restaurant? I laughed once. I can't even afford to replace the toaster here. I'm asking if you could. Her face was serious. I couldn't brush it off. Yeah, I admitted. I'd open something small, nothing fancy, just good food. A place where nobody gets looked at like they're less than everyone else just because they don't have money. Amelia smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen on her. Small, but it reached her eyes. That sounds like somewhere worth existing. I didn't know why those words stayed with me for the rest of the day. I only knew that Amelia was no longer just the quiet woman who sat in the back corner. She was the first person in a long time who had asked about the thing I'd stopped letting myself want. Amelia kept coming every morning after that. She still wore the same faded jacket. She still sat at the back table by the window. She still paid with whatever coins she had in her pocket. But when the cafe was quiet, we started talking longer. She never spoke about herself. Every time I asked what she used to do for work or where her family was, she changed the subject. I didn't push. I could feel the line she kept between us. Still, the more I watched her, the more I knew her life now wasn't the one she had known before. She chose her words carefully. She understood books and art and places that cost more money than most people in this neighborhood would ever see. Sometimes she would mention cities in Europe or charity galas without meaning to, then go quiet like she had said too much. One morning she watched me pull a shot of espresso and said the beans had been roasted too dark. If the temperature had been lower, the bitterness wouldn't have covered the aroma. I turned around. You know about coffee? She hesitated. I used to drink a lot of it. Expensive kind? She looked down at her cup. Before. That was all she said. I didn't understand her past, but I could see her body getting worse. Her hands shook more often. She ate slowly, sometimes only finishing half the toast. Some days she had to sit for a long time before she could stand up without holding the edge of the table. Then one morning she didn't come. I made the coffee and toasted the bread like always. When her usual time passed, the door stayed closed. I waited another half hour before I poured the coffee down the sink. The next day she didn't come either, or the day after that. Becca said maybe she had found somewhere else. Tony joked that she had moved on to a place where the food was easier to get for free. I didn't laugh. On the fourth day, Tony said maybe she had frozen to death somewhere. I turned on him. Don't say shit like that. He looked surprised. I almost never raised my voice at work. I was just joking. It's not funny. The air behind the counter got heavy after that. I stepped into the walk-in cooler for a few minutes just to breathe. Standing between the boxes of milk and the crates of eggs, I realized I was more worried about Amelia than I had let myself admit. I didn't have her phone number. I didn't know where she slept. I didn't know if she had anyone at all. If she disappeared for good, I had no way to find her. That afternoon after my shift, I walked the streets around the cafe. I checked the benches in the park, the bus stops, the spaces under the overpass. I didn't see her. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the way her hands shook and the days she left half her toast and the way she sometimes glanced at the door like she was afraid someone might walk in. On the fifth morning, the bell above the door rang. I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway. She was thinner than she had been a few days earlier. The circles under her eyes were darker. Her steps were slow and careful, like she wasn't sure her legs would hold. I didn't ask where she had been. I just poured the coffee, buttered the toast, and carried it to her table. She stared at the plate. Her lips moved like she wanted to say something, but in the end she only whispered, "You still made it? I didn't know if you were coming back. But you made it anyway. I thought you might show up." She lowered her head. A tear fell onto the back of her hand. I pretended not to see so she wouldn't have to feel ashamed. After that, I started noticing the small notebook she always carried. The cover was peeling, but the writing inside was neat and careful. She would sit and write for long stretches, sometimes stopping to wipe her eyes. Whenever I walked near, she closed it quickly. One morning, a man in a dark vest sat at the table near hers. The second Amelia saw him, she stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee. I ran over. "Amelia, it's okay. It's just coffee." She kept apologizing, her whole body shaking. The man didn't even look at her. He stayed on his phone. I brought her a fresh cup and sat across from her for a moment. "Did he scare you?" She shook her head too fast. "I just got startled." "Is someone looking for you?" She met my eyes. There was fear there, but also exhaustion. "No one you need to worry about." The answer didn't make me feel better. Another afternoon when the lunch rush was over, I found her with her head down on the table, shoulders shaking. I said her name quietly. She lifted her face. Her eyes were red and her skin looked pale. "I'm just tired," she said. "When was the last time you ate a full meal?" She didn't answer. I went back to the kitchen and made a chicken sandwich with melted cheese and brought it out. She looked at it like it might disappear if she touched it. "I don't have money. I'm not asking for money. Sam, eat." She studied me for a long moment, then picked up the sandwich and took a small bite. When my shift ended, she was still sitting there. I put on my jacket and told her we were closing. She stood and pulled the thin jacket tighter around herself. "Where are you going tonight?" She stayed quiet. "Home?" "I don't have a home." Even though I had already guessed, hearing her say it out loud made something sink in my chest. "Where do you sleep?" "Wherever I can." I looked outside. It was cold and the forecast said rain was coming. I wanted to help, but my apartment was one room and Amelia was still mostly a stranger. I didn't know if she was running from someone or if she was in danger. In the end, I gave her some cash and the address of a shelter a few blocks away. She took the piece of paper. "You don't have to do this." "I know." "Then why are you?" "Because it's cold tonight." She looked at me for a long time. "Do you ever think about how much kindness is worth?" "No." "Why not?" "I think if you have to measure it too carefully, it stops being kindness." She gave me a small, tired smile. "Most people measure." "I'm not as good as you think I am." "You don't have to be special. You just have to see people." She folded the paper, put it in her pocket, and walked out. I stood in the empty cafe and watched her figure disappear past the glass door. I didn't know then that she had been asking about my dreams and my kindness, because she was getting ready to make a final decision. I only knew she was getting weaker and I still didn't understand what was really happening to her. A few days after that conversation about kindness, Amelia asked about my old dream again. The cafe was quieter than usual that morning. She sat through most of the shift with just one cup of coffee. "If you had enough money tomorrow," she asked, "where would you even start?" "I already told you, it's not going to happen. Just pretend for a minute." I wiped the table next to hers and thought about it. I'd rent a small space, maybe 10 or 12 tables at most. "What would you serve?" "Simple things. Hot soup, fresh bread, stews, food that makes people feel taken care of." "Would you charge people who couldn't pay?" I looked at her. "I haven't thought that far." "Think about it now." I sat down in the chair across from her. "Maybe I'd put up a board by the counter. People could pay extra for a meal someone else might need later. If someone was hungry, they could just take a ticket. No questions." Amelia smiled. "I like that. But I still need an actual restaurant first." "You'll have one." The way she said it made me stop. "Do you know something I don't?" She looked down at her notebook. I just think some people deserve the chance to start over. I asked her why she kept caring so much about a dream that wasn't even hers. She didn't answer right away. Maybe because you still have one, she said finally. Not everyone does. After that morning, she disappeared again. The first day, I told myself she was probably at the shelter. The second day, I started to worry. By the third day, I called the shelter I had given her the address for. The woman on the phone said they couldn't share personal information, but no one matching Amelia's description had checked in recently. On the fourth day, the worry turned into something heavier. I still set a coffee and a slice of toast on her table every morning. Becca had started to say something a couple times, but when she saw my face, she stayed quiet. On the fifth day, I went looking for her again after work. I walked through the park, the alleys, the train station, the places people used for temporary cover. I asked a few people who lived on the street, but nobody knew her. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the old recipe notebook I used to keep. I thought about every question Amelia had asked me. I wondered if she had been trying to say goodbye. I regretted never asking for her last name, never asking for a phone number, never sitting down and telling her straight that I knew she was sick. I had told myself respecting her privacy was the kind thing to do. Now I was afraid I had used that respect as an excuse to stay on the safe side of her pain. On the sixth morning, I still made the coffee and the toast. The chair stayed empty. The coffee grew cold. I understood this time she might not come back at all. Around 9 o'clock, the door opened. 4 large men in black suits walked in first. They were tall, moved carefully, and scanned the whole room the second they stepped inside. Behind them came a woman and a man in expensive gray suits, both carrying briefcases. The entire cafe went quiet. The woman walked up to the counter. "Is Samuel Rodriguez working here today?" Becca pointed at me without saying a word. All 6 of them turned in my direction. My heart started pounding. I thought maybe I had somehow gotten pulled into whatever trouble Amelia had been running from. Maybe these people were private investigators or debt collectors or someone from her old life. The woman stepped forward. "Are you Samuel Rodriguez?" "Yeah. I'm Margaret Calloway. I represent the estate of Amelia Rose Hart. This is my colleague, Richard Brennan. We need to speak with you privately." It was the first time I heard her full name. We sat at the back table. I took the seat Amelia always used. Margaret and Richard sat across from me. The 4 men in black stayed near the door. On the table in front of us was still the cold coffee and the untouched toast from that morning. Margaret opened a file. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm very sorry to have to tell you this. Amelia Hart passed away 2 nights ago." Even though part of me had been preparing for bad news, the words still made the air feel colder. How did she die? Heart failure. She had been ill for a long time and knew her time was limited. I stared at the cup in front of me. I remembered the shaking hands, the days she couldn't finish her food, the exhausted look in her eyes the last time I saw her. "Why are you here?" Richard took out a thick, cream-colored envelope that had been sealed carefully. Margaret placed it on the table between us. "Miss Hart left very specific instructions. We were to find you and deliver this letter directly. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it yet." "What did she leave me?" "Before you read the letter, there's something you need to know. Amelia was not the person everyone in this cafe believed her to be." I frowned. Margaret told me Amelia had been the sole heir to a family whose assets were worth close to $900 million. I thought I had misheard. That can't be right. She didn't even have a place to live. She couldn't afford coffee most days. Richard spoke. "She had everything, but in the last 2 years of her life, she chose to walk away from it. According to the lawyers, Amelia's parents had died in an accident. The man she was supposed to marry had left when her illness became serious. After that, she cut ties with almost everyone she knew and started living under a different name. She didn't want anyone approaching her because of money or status or family connections. She wanted to know if anyone would still treat her like a person worth respecting when all of that was gone. She wrote about you in her journals," Margaret said. "About the coffee you brought her. About cutting the toast into small pieces. About never asking her to explain her situation in exchange for help. I felt my eyes start to burn. I was just doing small things. To you, they were small, Margaret answered. To her, they weren't. Richard slid a check across the table. $1 million. I stared at the number for a long time without really understanding that it was supposed to be mine. This is the portion of her estate she left to you, Richard said. There are no conditions attached. I shook my head right away. I can't take this. You can, Margaret said. And it was her final wish. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a letter written in the same careful handwriting I had seen in her notebook. She wrote that she knew I couldn't fix her illness or change what had already happened to her. But I had done something most people didn't do. I had seen her. She remembered every cup of coffee, every slice of toast cut into small pieces, every conversation where I never asked what she could give back in return. She left the money because she wanted me to have the chance to open the restaurant I had described. She believed I wouldn't just use it to escape my old life. She believed I would build a place where people who felt invisible would still feel welcome. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "Thank you for treating me like I still had value, even when you thought I had nothing." I read the letter 3 times. By the third time, I couldn't keep it together anymore. I lowered my head, covered my face with one hand, and cried right there at the table where Amelia had sat every morning. After a while, I wiped my face and looked up at Margaret and Richard. My voice sounded rough. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Margaret closed the file slowly. "There are no legal requirements. You can buy a house, invest it, travel, spend it however you want." Amelia made sure there were no conditions attached because she wanted the final choice to be yours. That somehow made the check feel heavier. $1 million could change everything for me. I could quit this job today. I could move out of the small apartment I could barely afford. I could stop worrying about bills for a long time. But every time I pictured using the money just for myself, I saw Amelia sitting in that wet jacket, hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the knife steady. I didn't want to turn down her gift. At the same time, I didn't want to turn her kindness into something reckless just to prove I deserved it. I told them I needed time to think. For the next 2 weeks, I kept showing up for my shifts at Beacon Street Cafe. The news about the inheritance spread fast among the staff. Tony suddenly started being friendly. The owner asked if I wanted to put money into the cafe. A couple of people I hadn't heard from in years started texting. I understood a little more of what Amelia must have gone through. Once people knew you had money, it became hard to tell which attention was real. I didn't tell anyone the exact amount except the lawyers. I didn't quit right away either. Every morning I still set a coffee and a slice of toast on Amelia's old table. I wasn't waiting for her to walk through the door anymore. I just needed something familiar while I tried to figure out what she had actually wanted from me. One night I opened the old recipe notebook I used to keep. Inside were pages of ideas for a small restaurant I had written years ago. Soup, stews, fresh bread. A board on the wall where customers could pay for a meal someone else might need later. I remembered what Amelia had said when I described it. That sounds like somewhere worth existing. That was when I knew what I wanted to do. I called Margaret and Richard and asked to meet them again. "I want to open a restaurant," I told them, "but I don't want to use all the money on myself." I planned to split the inheritance into 3 parts. One part would buy and renovate a small space. Another part would be invested so the restaurant could stay open during the first difficult years. The rest would go into a foundation that provided meals, temporary housing support, and medical help for people who were homeless or in crisis. I wanted to name it the Amelia Rose Foundation. Margaret looked at me for a long moment. "Are you sure? Restaurants are a very risky investment." "I know. Amelia didn't ask you to do charity work to prove anything. I'm not doing it to prove anything. I'm doing it because this is what I told her I would do and I didn't even know she had money." Margaret stayed quiet for a while, then she smiled. "I think that's exactly why she chose you. I found an old space a few blocks from Beacon Street Cafe that used to be a family restaurant. It had been closed for years. The paint was peeling, the wiring was outdated, and the kitchen needed to be rebuilt almost from scratch. I spent months working on it. During the day, I still did my morning shifts at Beacon. In the afternoons and evenings, I met contractors, checked equipment, and tested recipes in a temporary kitchen I set up in my apartment. I didn't hire a famous chef. I built the menu myself from the simple, warm food I had always wanted to serve, food working people could afford. On the wall next to the counter, I hung a large board with the words, "Someone already paid it forward for you." Any customer could buy an extra meal ticket and stick it on the board. People who needed a meal could just take one. No explanations required. I didn't want anyone to stand at the counter and have to justify why they were hungry. Becca was the first person who asked to come work with me. She admitted she had treated Amelia badly before. "I used to think she made the place look worse," she said, her voice full of regret. But the way I looked at her was the ugly part. I didn't tell her she had to keep punishing herself. I just asked if she was willing to treat the next person differently. She nodded. I hired her as the morning manager. Tony also asked for a job. He still hadn't really taken back the things he used to say about Amelia. I turned him down. Amelia had taught me that giving people second chances didn't mean ignoring everything they had done. The night before opening, I sat alone inside the new restaurant. Every table had been wiped clean. The kitchen was quiet. On one wall was a small framed photo of Amelia that the lawyers had given me. In the picture, she wore an elegant dress, her hair was neat, and she was smiling brightly. She looked almost nothing like the woman who had sat in the back corner wearing that worn jacket. I looked at the photo and said out loud, "I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm not going to let your gift turn into just a number in a bank account." No one answered, but in the quiet, I could still remember the real smile she had given me the day I told her about the restaurant I used to dream about. That was enough to make me stand up, turn off the lights, and get ready to open the doors the next morning. The first day Amelia's table opened was busier than I expected. Some people came because they had heard the story about the inheritance. Others were just curious, but after a few weeks, the ones who kept coming back weren't there for the story anymore. They came for the food. The chicken soup became the most ordered item. The beef stew usually ran out before evening. I baked bread twice a day because I refused to serve anything that had sat overnight. The pay it forward board started to fill up. At first, there were only a few tickets. Then a bus driver bought 2 extra meals. A nurse paid for 5. A group of high school students pooled their money and stuck 10 tickets on the board. People who looked like Amelia sometimes walked in. Old clothes, careful eyes, the same quiet way of moving through a room. The staff had been told not to look at them any differently. No one asked why they needed a ticket. No one watched them while they ate. They received the same plate, the same portion, and the same service as anyone who paid full price. I knew one meal wouldn't fix anyone's life. But Amelia had once told me I hadn't saved her by fixing everything. I had only made her feel like she still existed in someone else's eyes. I wanted the restaurant to do at least that much. The Amelia Rose Foundation started working around the same time. The money was invested carefully under Margaret and Richard's guidance. We paid for extra beds and shelters during the winter, covered medical bills for people without insurance, and supported a job training program for women who didn't have stable housing. I didn't pretend to be an expert. I put together a small board of people who actually understood social work, healthcare, and housing. My only real job was to make sure the foundation never forgot why it had been created in the first place. A year after the restaurant opened, I went back to Beacon Street Cafe. Nothing much had changed. The same old smell of grease and burnt coffee, the same noisy espresso machine, the same back table by the window. I sat in Amelia's seat. Becca brought me a coffee and joked that it still tasted terrible. "I think it's worse now," I said. She sat across from me. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't brought her that toast that day?" "I don't like thinking about it. Your life would be completely different." I looked at the table. So would hers. I knew I couldn't take credit for saving Amelia. She had still died. I hadn't cured her illness or pulled her out of the years of pain she had already lived through. I hadn't found out the truth in time to help her more. But maybe in those last few months, she hadn't felt completely invisible anymore. Maybe that counted for something. On the first anniversary of her death, I went to the cemetery with Margaret. I brought a thermos of hot coffee and a slice of toast I had already cut into small pieces. Her gravestone was simple, just her name, the years, and the words, "A beloved daughter, a friend remembered." I set the coffee and the toast in front of the stone. Margaret stood beside me holding a small bouquet of white flowers. "Did she talk about me a lot?" I asked. "In the last months, yes. Quite a bit." "Did she ever explain why she never told me the truth?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "She was afraid that once you knew she had money, everything between the two of you would change. She wanted to keep at least one relationship that she knew had nothing to do with money." I looked down at the stone. I wish she had trusted me enough to tell me. Sometimes trust doesn't win over fear. I didn't know what to say to that. After Margaret left, I stayed a little longer. I told Amelia about the restaurant, even though I knew she couldn't answer. I told her the pay it forward board was usually full by the end of the weekend. I told her Becca had become a good manager and always reminded new staff not to judge customers by their clothes. I told her about a woman who had been living in her car but found work after the foundation helped her. I told her about a college student who bought an extra meal every time he got paid. Finally, I said, "You asked how much kindness is worth. I still don't know the answer, but I know it can keep traveling a long way after the person who started it is gone." I stood up, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and walked out of the cemetery. Years later, Amelia's table is still a small, ordinary place in the neighborhood. I never turned it into a chain. I didn't want Amelia's name to become something people used to make money. I did open one more location closer to a shelter the foundation supports. In the first restaurant, the back corner table is always left empty in the mornings. There's a small sign on it now that says, "For the one who taught us that no one should be treated like they're invisible." Every morning before we open, I still put a cup of coffee and a slice of toast cut into small pieces on that table. Not because I think Amelia will walk through the door. I do it, so I remember where all of this actually started. I used to think I was only giving a stranger breakfast she couldn't pay for. But every morning, Amelia was also giving something to me. She saw the dream I had hidden away. She reminded me that I once wanted to build a place that treated people with dignity. And in the end, she didn't just leave me money. She left me a responsibility. No matter what clothes someone wears when they walk through the door, no matter how much money they have or how bad their life is at that moment, I still have to see them as a person who matters. Because that was what Amelia needed. And it's what every person deserves.